Have you ever seen a car so strange, so disproportionate, that it made you say, what were they thinking? Well, get ready, because today we're traveling straight back to the 80s to discover the 10 ugliest and most bizarre American cars that ever rolled down our streets. From sedans with no identity to impossible hybrids between coupes and pickups, this list is packed with curiosities, nostalgia, and automotive oddities that only the bravest will remember fondly. If you love classic cars, the forgotten stories of the auto industry, and that 80s design that defies all logic, then this video was made for you. And if you're already smiling just by looking at the thumbnail, click like and subscribe to the channel, because here we always bring you the best, and sometimes the worst, of automotive history. Let's start this list that will make you question everything you thought you knew about car design. 1984, Lincoln Continental. Have you ever seen a car that looks like it was designed with a ruler and zero emotion? Well, welcome to the 1984 Lincoln Continental. And before any nostalgic souls get offended, yes, we know the name Continental carries decades of prestige. But this generation in particular is like someone in the design room said, "What if we made a brick on wheels?" And everyone replied, "Sure, sounds classy." This car was born in an era when American manufacturers were struggling to find their place in a market increasingly influenced by Europe and Japan. And Lincoln, trying to reinvent itself, decided to shrink its flagship luxury sedan but without losing the visual status. The result? A car that looks longer than it is wide, with a rear end that defies proportion and a front grille that seems ripped straight from a metal filing cabinet. Under the hood, this monster carried a 3.8-liter V6 engine that delivered a modest 120 horsepower. Yes, 120. To move a body nearly 16 feet long. The top speed barely exceeded 105 miles per hour, and the 0 to 60 acceleration was about as thrilling as watching grass grow over 13 seconds. But hey, it wasn't made for racing. It was made to float, although it floated like an old couch on an ice rink. Just over 80,000 units were produced for that model year, and today, if you find one in good condition, it can cost between $4,000 and $8,000. Although many are in the hands of ironic collectors or retro design enthusiasts who see beauty where others see a factory mistake. But here comes the fun fact. This was the first Continental in decades without a standard V8. For purists, that was almost sacrilege. A Lincoln without a V8. It was like ordering a steak without meat. This decision marked Lincoln's turn toward efficiency, or at least they tried. 1982, Ford EXP. This car was born at a time when Ford thought, what if we gave the lonely driver a car made just for them? And that's how the Experimental Personal, or EXP, came to life. Yes, that name wasn't a coincidence. They wanted it to sound modern, bold, futuristic. But what came out of the oven was a little car that looked like the weird cousin of the Ford Escort, with a rear end chopped off abruptly, as if the designer had run out of time and left the drawing unfinished. Visually, the EXP was everything you wouldn't expect from a sports car, low, long, but with a sharp nose and a sloping tail that seemed to have a hatchback complex. It was a car that made you look twice, once out of confusion, and again out of curiosity. The sharply raked windshield, the tiny rear windows, and its long front end made it look, well, like it came straight off the set of a low-budget sci-fi movie. Under the hood, the EXP debuted with a modest 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine inherited from the Escort, delivering just 70 horsepower. Powerful. Only if you compared it to a bicycle going downhill. It accelerated from 0 to 60 in over 14 seconds, which, even in the 80s, was slow. Later versions offered electronic fuel injection and a turbo, reaching up to 120 horsepower. But by then, the visual damage was already done. A fun fact is that the EXP was the first two-seater coupe Ford had produced in decades, and while that sounds exclusive, the market didn't get it. A sporty two-seat car with no power based on an economy car? It wasn't exactly a success. Around 225,000 units were built between 1982 and 1988, but its moment of glory never arrived. Today, you can find one for less than $5,000 if anyone dares to admit they want it. 1981 AMC Eagle SX/4. What if I told you that in 1981 there was a car that blended the rebellious spirit of a sporty coupe with the ruggedness of a 4x4 off-roader? Just like that, without asking for permission or apologizing. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the AMC Eagle SX/4, a car so strange it looks like the result of a failed experiment between engineers with opposite visions, but too passionate to say no. This little American warrior was born in the context of the oil crisis, when consumers wanted more economical cars but didn't want to give up adventure, and AMC, always creative or desperate, depending on who you ask, decided to take a compact coupe, raise the suspension, add black cladding all over, and the most unexpected touch, all-wheel drive. Yes, 4x4 traction in a coupe in 1981. The result was curious. Visually, it looked like an escort getting ready for a rally, but forgot to take off its orthopedic shoes. But let's not fool ourselves. That weird look had its charm. It was tough, different, and definitely didn't go unnoticed. Under the hood, it came with either a 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine or a 4.2-liter inline-six with about 110 horsepower. It wasn't fast, but it was tough, and that made it unique. Top speed? It barely reached 100 miles per hour. Total production? Just over 30,000 units between 1981 and 1983. Current value? Between $7,000 and $15,000, depending on condition. And the best part? Many of them still run. They're as tough as they look. Fun fact, it was one of the first all-wheel drive cars offered in the U.S. market outside the SUV segment. In many ways, the SX/4 was a forerunner of what we now call modern crossovers, ahead of its time, dressed in the most questionable fashion of its era. Now, let's talk. Just you and me. Can you imagine driving this down the street today? Would you be the weird one in the neighborhood or the coolest? Leave me your answer in the comments. 1987 Pontiac 6000 STE. In 1987, Pontiac decided it was time to show the world it could also build a smart, luxurious car with a futuristic soul. The victim of this experiment? The 6000 STE, whose initials stood for Special Touring Edition, although some joked it really meant strictly about aesthetics. The STE was the brand's attempt to compete with European sedans like the BMW 5 Series or the Audi 100. Ambitious, yes, but the result was like someone took the idea of an executive luxury car and ran it through a poorly calibrated photocopier, boxy lines, wraparound taillights, and a grille that looked like a forced robotic smile. Visually, it was the rebellious child of a conservative family. Now, under its hood, things got interesting. It came with a 2.8-liter V6 engine producing around 130 horsepower. It wasn't a beast, but for its time, it offered a smooth ride and a certain mechanical refinement. It also included four-wheel independent suspension ABS brakes in the 80s and sport-style power steering. For many, it was more technology than you'd expect from a Pontiac. In terms of production, the STE model stayed on the market between 1983 and 1989, with several updates. The 87 model, in particular, was one of the most technologically complete. These days, finding one in good condition is tough, but not impossible. Prices hover between $6,000 and $10,000, and they're usually in the hands of collectors who understand the hidden value of the misunderstood. Fun fact, in period advertising campaigns, Pontiac called the 6000 STE the future of the American automobile. Big words that the styling didn't always support, because between its digital dashboard, geometric upholstery, and that steering wheel that looks straight out of an Atari video game, the car tried too hard and sometimes failed gracefully. 1982 Buick Skyhawk. This is one of those cars that, when you see it, makes you frown and ask, was this supposed to be elegant? Or was it an inside joke from the design department? Because the poor Skyhawk seemed to have an identity crisis. It was small, compact, clearly economical, but with a front end that looked ready to house twice the engine it actually had. It was part of GM's J platform, shared with other models like the Chevrolet Cavalier and the Oldsmobile Forenza, but Buick tried to position it as something more refined. They added moldings, chrome trim, a worthy badge, and an extremely long nose, disproportionate to the rest of its body. From the side, it looked like the car was about to tip forward. Under the hood, which was almost comically oversized, the Skyhawk offered 1.8 and 2.0-liter engines with a modest 88 to 110 horsepower, nothing that justified that elongated snout. It accelerated from 0 to 60 in over 12 seconds, and its top speed didn't impress even its own speedometer, about 103 miles per hour. What it did have going for it was good fuel economy and a fairly smooth ride for the time. In total, just over 500,000 units were produced between 1982 and 1989. The first-year model was especially remembered for its attempt to combine luxury and an economy body, and while it's rare to see one driving today, you can find a few survivors for prices ranging from $3,000 to $6,000, depending on condition and the buyer's nostalgia. 1980, Chevrolet El Camino. Talking about the El Camino is stepping onto sacred ground. This hybrid between car and truck, what in Spanish we might affectionately call a car with a pickup's rear end, was one of Chevrolet's boldest and most successful experiments. But of course, that was back in the 60s and 70s. When 1980 arrived, something broke. The design of this sixth generation tried to be modern, aerodynamic, adapted to new fuel economy regulations. But the result was an El Camino with squarer lines, an elongated generic front end, and a rear bed that looked like it was tacked on at the last minute. What used to be visual harmony had turned into a collage of shapes. Many fans saw this model as a departure from the muscular and elegant style that had defined its predecessors. Under the hood, however, it still offered respectable options. 3.3-liter V6 engines and V8s that went up to 5.7 liters in some versions. The most powerful one, with around 170 horsepower, could reach about 112 miles per hour. But times had changed. The era of muscle cars was fading, and this El Camino seemed unsure whether to keep fighting or retire with dignity. Around 57,000 units were produced in 1980, and while it wasn't a failure, it wasn't a milestone either. Today, you can find well-kept examples for about $10,000 to $20,000. And while some people restore them with pride, others still look at them with raised eyebrows. And here comes the fun fact. This model was one of the last before the El Camino disappeared in 1987. After that, the concept died, though it was never forgotten. Now, I want to ask you a direct question from fan to fan. What do you think about this 1980 El Camino? Would you save it or erase it from the family tree? Let me know in the comments. I want to read your opinion. 1984, Mercury Topaz. This car appeared on the scene as a kind of more elegant version of the Ford Tempo. But let's be honest, putting a finer suit on something plain doesn't always turn it into something else. The Topaz was Mercury's answer to a market demanding efficiency, comfort, and if possible, a bit of style. But that last detail got lost along the way. Visually, it was a compact sedan with squared-off lines, rectangular headlights, a discreet grille, and proportions that inspired neither love nor hate, just indifference. It's the kind of car that if you see it on the street, you won't remember it 2 blocks later. But in the 80s, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. In a sea of automotive extravagance, the Topaz was a refuge of sobriety. Under the hood, it had modest engine options, a 2.3-liter 4-cylinder delivering just 84 horsepower. There was also a version with all-wheel drive, quite unusual in that segment, and both 5-speed manual and automatic transmissions were available. Its top speed was around 99 miles per hour, and it needed over 13 seconds to go from 0 to 60. It wasn't a rocket, but it never pretended to be. Between 1984 and 1987, hundreds of thousands of units were sold. It was reliable, cheap, and got the job done. And although today it's not considered a desirable classic, it had its place on American streets as the family's everyday car, the young driver's first ride, or the grandpa's choice after he didn't want a roaring V8 anymore. Fun fact, the Mercury Topaz was one of the first Ford Motor Company cars to include an independent front suspension with coil springs, something marketed as a European feel in the commercials. And yes, that sounded very exotic in American suburbs. 1981 Dodge Omni. Have you ever seen a car so ordinary that when it drove down your street, you didn't even notice it? But 20 years later, it makes you smile just to remember it? Invisible to many in its time, unforgettable to those who lived with it, the Dodge Omni was so simple, so boxy, so economical, that seeing it on a list of strange and ugly cars isn't unfair. But it does feel a little ungrateful, because even though its looks were anything but inspiring, this little hatchback played a key role in Chrysler's revival in the late 70s and early 80s. But let's take it step by step. Visually, the Omni looked like a Lego brick on wheels. Its lines were so straight that if you laid a ruler on top, it disappeared. Square headlights, a tiny grille, a body with no frills. It was as if the designer had said, "We'll do exactly what's necessary, not one curve more." And that's exactly what they did. There wasn't the slightest attempt to be visually seductive, but that's the point. It wasn't built for that. Under the hood, the Omni came with 1.7 and 2.2-liter engines, the early ones sourced from Volkswagen. The most powerful barely topped 85 horsepower, and its top speed was around 93 miles per hour. Exciting, number efficient, and affordable? Very much so. And in an era of fuel crises, that was worth its weight in gold. More than 1 million units were produced between 1978 and 1990. In 1981 alone, nearly 150,000 were sold. It was one of the first front-wheel drive compacts built in the U.S., and that made it a very popular choice for people who just needed something functional and cheap. In fact, without the Omni and its cousin, the Plymouth Horizon, Chrysler might not have survived the decade. Fun fact, in 1986, a GLH Goes Like Hell version was released, tuned by Carroll Shelby, turning this personality-free car into a little beast. But that's another story. The 1981 Omni, in its purest form, was like that quiet friend who never says much, but is always there when you need them. It didn't win beauty contests or street races, but it gave mobility to millions of families who just wanted to get from point A to point B without any drama. 1981 Dodge Aries. Imagine you're in the 80s. You need a reliable, economical car, and you don't care one bit whether it's pretty. The answer? Dodge Aries. It was like that friend who always shows up on time to every gathering, but never says a single interesting word. And yet, there it is, holding everything together. The Aries was part of Chrysler's famous K-line, a platform of compact front-wheel drive cars that literally saved the company from the edge of bankruptcy. And even though its exterior design was, let's say, deliberately boring, you can't deny it delivered exactly what it promised: efficiency, economy, and practicality. Style, well, that was another story. Aesthetically, the Aries looked like it was designed on a rainy afternoon by a tired engineer. Everything was square. The hood, the roof, the headlights, the steering wheel, even the sole. Its side profile was so flat that if you looked at it from a distance, it looked like a 5-year-old's drawing. No curves, no eye-catching details, just straight lines and corners. Under the hood, though, it had honest engines, a 2.2-liter four-cylinder with 84 horsepower, nothing to get excited about, but enough to move it with dignity. It accelerated from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 13 seconds and could reach around 99 miles per hour if you had patience. As for sales, the Aries was a real success. More than 972,000 units produced between 1981 and 1989. The 1981 model in particular was crucial for restoring faith in Chrysler and became a symbol of economic recovery for many American households. Today, you can find one for under $4,000 if someone bothered to keep it around. And here comes the fun fact. Thanks to its flexible platform, the Aries served as the base for wagons, sedans, coupes, and even improvised limousines. Sure, none of them won design awards, but they were all champions of daily life. 1980, Chevrolet Citation. Have you ever heard the phrase, "the intention was good, but..." Well, that perfectly sums up the Citation. In 1980, General Motors launched it with great fanfare as the future of the American compact sedan. It was the first model based on the new front-wheel drive X platform, which was marketed as a huge innovation. And it was. The problem was everything else. Aesthetically, the Citation didn't seem to know what it was. From some angles, it looked like a muscular hatchback. From others, like a sedan that had been chopped in half. Its front end was bulky with sharp lines and no visual coherence. The rear, in contrast, looked like it had simply given up. As a whole, it felt like a car designed by 3 different teams who never spoke to each other. Under the hood, it offered 2.5-liter four-cylinder engines and 2.8-liter V6s, producing between 90 and 130 horsepower. The X11 version was the sportiest, with upgraded suspension and a somewhat more aggressive look. Although it still looked like a teenager going through an awkward phase, its 0 to 60 miles per hour acceleration was around 10 seconds, which wasn't bad, but it didn't exactly make you smile. In its first year, over 800,000 units were sold. It was a resounding success, at first. But soon the problems began. Mechanical failures, unreliable brakes, and build quality so poor that the interiors looked worn out before 30,000 miles. For many, the Citation went from being GM's great hope to the punchline of jokes in less than 5 years. Today, finding one in good condition is like spotting a tired unicorn. It's not a car coveted by collectors, and its market value is usually under $5,000. Still, there are some who appreciate it for what it represented. A brave attempt at modernization, even if the result wasn't the prettiest. Fun fact, in some period ads, GM compared the Citation to high-end European cars. Yes, they compared it to an Audi. Optimism definitely wasn't in short supply. And that's how we wrap up this parade of rolling oddities. The ugliest and strangest American cars of the glorious 1980s. Some were brave, others confused, and several simply unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. But now, I want to know your opinion. Which of those cars did you find the most ridiculous? And which one would you secretly keep in your garage even if no one was watching? Leave your answer in the comments. Don't leave without sharing your thoughts, because your stories and your point of view make this channel a place where nostalgia and the passion for cars truly live on. And since we're already in this mood, you can't miss our video about the ugliest cars of the 70s. I promise you, if the 80s ones were weird, the 70s are a whole other dimension. Click here and join me for another ride full of surprises. See you there, lover of glorious old metal.